Hello and welcome to Get Rich Slow, the podcast that challenges the conventional get-rich-quick ideology by finding out what authentic success really means and how you can achieve it. I'm Hannah Martin, founder of Talent Ladies Club, and today I'm joined by James Newell from Clear Sales Message for an episode on selling yourself. Hello, James. Thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure.
To start with, I'd just like to kind of find out, what does success mean to you personally?
Well, success to me, it's a really interesting one because I've wrestled with this for years, like most people have. But actually, it's quite sunny weather here at the moment. The last couple of days are my definition of success. I've been sat in my garden, in the sunshine, doing work that I love for clients that I respect on my time frame and on my terms. And I'm setting a good example for my children. For me, that's my kind of definition of success. It's the control side of things. So everything is how I want it to be. I think that's my definition of success.
Oh, I think that sounds a pretty good definition of success to me too. So you obviously are a sales expert. Were you always good at selling?
Yeah, God, I was good at an expert even now. I hate it. Guru, whatever. So I was told I was good at selling before I realised it myself. And I think good at selling for me is just synonymous with being a good communicator. So I was always very good at communicating with people. That's something I'll definitely own. I'm an expert at that. I was always very good at communicating with people, and I was told that I should be in sales and I should sell stuff. And then, yeah, I did that and it went rather well.
So what's your professional sales background then?
So my professional background is I worked for Daimler Mercedes-Benz in the UK for approximately 12 years. I was a key account manager, so it's kind of very large-scale business-to-business corporate selling of Mercedes-Benz vehicles. Over that time, I did about £600 million of collective business for them. And I never missed a single target in my entire 12-year career. I worried about every single month, I can tell you, but I never missed a single one of them. And it was me unpicking what happened and how I managed that led me to do what I do now. Because at the time, it wasn't something I was actively following and doing. I've got a very strong work ethic, but there were things that were going on that I didn't really understand, but it was working well.
So it's one of those things where you obviously, it sounds like you had an innate ability or knowledge of sales, and then did you have to kind of consciously go, well, I'm doing it naturally, but what is it that I'm doing to help you understand how you can help others to do it as well?
Yeah, 100%. So in sort of late 2016, early 2017, when I wanted to leave employment and leave a real job, as it were, and work for myself, somebody turned around to me and said, you should teach people how to sell. And my first response was, I don't even know how I'm doing it myself. How can I teach it? And that led me on this incredible journey of essentially turning selling into like paint by numbers and really working out the behavioral, the scientific, just the logic and common sense factors that combine. But it's always, whenever I hear selling, I just hear the word communication, because that's what it's really all about. It's just communication.
So for you, what do you think makes like someone a good, probably communication would be the thing, but what do you think makes someone a really good salesperson?
A really good salesperson is somebody that can focus on the communication side of things and doesn't feel like they have to adopt any kind of behavior or language or persona that isn't them. It's about, it sounds really kind of cliche, but it's about being authentic and about being honest. And it's also about putting, if I was selling to you now, as it were, it's about putting your needs first. So the fact that I need to close you to make some money should not be pressuring me to push you to buy. I should be considering, can I help you? And if I can't, being very upfront about that and saying, look, I don't think I can help you here, but let me see if I can refer you to somebody else. For me, that's real selling. It's about putting the other person's needs first. If you can help them, great. If you can't, see what you can do. But it's with that kind of overriding authenticity of communication.
So when you see people who might say to you, I can't sell, I'm not very good at selling, are there some clear mistakes you see them making? And is it mindset or is it in practice?
Yeah. It's mindset, and there's a couple of mechanical things. So the first mechanical thing, which is the reason I'm in business really with Clear Sales Message, is the fact that we tend to talk about the wrong things. We sell the wrong things to people. So the example that I always give is airline adverts. So when you see an airline advert, you very rarely see a plane or a plane seat in those adverts. What you'll see is a beach, romantic couple in Paris, whatever. The airlines understand intrinsically that you don't necessarily want to buy a plane seat. You want to buy the holiday. So they focus on that first. And this is called syntax. It's just changing the order. It's a very fancy term, isn't it? But it's just changing the order of what we talk about. But thanks to something called the false, and false as in incorrect, the false consensus effect, we think everybody shares our view of the world. So everybody has our understanding and uses the same language, etc., which kind of makes sense because to communicate with people and try and establish multivariate viewpoints is very difficult. So I expect if I tell you that I'm drinking from a black coffee cup, that your visualization of that is the same as mine, but it may not be. Different ages, races, genders, experience, etc. So we tend to talk about things that matter to us in terms we understand, and we go wrong from the get-go. And this is where the classic features and benefits problem comes in. So I'm busy telling you about the plane seat, how exciting it is and how comfortable it is, etc., etc. You can care less. You just want to be on the beach, sipping alcohol, doing whatever you want to do. And that's the first mistake I see people make. And that's where Clear Sales message came in. And it's how do we actually, because it's a very natural thing. And even I suffer with it. I've got mechanisms to stop me doing it myself. But how do we unbreak that very natural human behavior? So that's a mechanical thing, sort of selling the wrong thing, essentially. And what you should be doing is selling the destination, not the journey. And then the second one is this notion of, and if you do a Google image search for salesman, saleswoman, sales team, or sales anything, you get this collective visualization through a Google image search of what we view selling is. And we've been missold selling, as it were. So we think we have to be greedy, pushy, aggressive. It's a very masculine thing, and it's a very zero-sum game. Either I'm going to win or you're going to lose. There's this real power play going on. So what happens is when we come to sell in our own life, we feel like we either have to replicate that behavior and potentially become somebody we're not. We feel like we have to replicate that behavior. Hey, how are you doing? And, how would you like to pay? We behave very differently. Or we become terrified by that and we get to the other end of the spectrum. We end up friend zoning people. So we don't, how could I ever possibly talk about commercials now and trying to get business from you because we're going on holiday and we're now roommates kind of thing. So it's about getting in that middle ground of we're not so passive that we're getting friend zoned, but we're not so aggressive that we're making it this real kind of zero-sum game. It's about presenting the offer, asking for the business and being commercial about that, but doing it in a way that's congruent with who you are as a person.
A lot of my audience are women. And you think women are more kind of inclined to the friend zone area where they have a relationship with someone and then think they can't sell to them because, like say, hey, we're kind of friendly towards each other and I don't want, if I sell, I then got to become a different personality and therefore our relationship's broken.
I think I see it. I see the problem across both genders, but definitely I see more women sort of coming through my door or the talks that I give and things like that. More women, but I think that might be more reflective of the fact that women are more open to feedback and help than men are, right? I think that might be more reflective of that. So I think it's a thing that affects all of us. But once you are in that friend zone space, or it's a bit like if you're in a conversation, you've forgotten somebody's name. How do you go back and say, sorry, what was your name? It's very difficult, right? So if we're already friends in the friend zone world, how do I then go back and say, so do you want to buy this or not? Without really changing the dynamic of the conversation. So that's a real key problem that I see and easily solved.
How? How do they solve it?
I knew you were going to say that. How I approach selling and how I teach selling, there's two things you've got to do. It's information and opportunity. I've got to give you all the information you need about my product or my service to give you the opportunity to make the best decision for yourself, whilst also focusing on what matters to you. So selling the destination, not the journey. So that's the first bit, giving you all that information that you need. The second thing, and this is the missing part, is the opportunity. So if you don't ask for the business, either I feel like you're not confident enough that you can help me or confident enough in your offer, or I might perceive it as arrogance. Oh, she didn't even ask, like, gosh, she doesn't want my business kind of thing. So we have to ask for the business, give them that opportunity. And the simplest way to do that is to literally kind of recap the conversation and say, okay, so this is where you are right now. This is where ideally you'd like to be. This is how I'll get you there with my offering. How does that sound to you? I'd really like to work with you. I'm quite excited. I've got a few ideas, blah, blah, blah. But how does that sound to you? Does that sound like something that you'd be interested in or you'd like to proceed with? Even something as soft as that can make the difference. But that's how we fix this. We just ask for the business. And asking for the business isn't, how would you like to pay? Or when would you like to book in? Or anything like that. It's much softer than that. It's, how does that sound to you? Is that kind of what you're expecting? Would you like to proceed? But making sure we ask, because most people don't for various different reasons. And that's where it's either construed as lack of confidence or worse, arrogance. Then we lose people.
That's a good reframe, actually. And I think I know that, that sometimes I find selling difficult because, you have to then switch into, I'm going to ask for the business. Even though I teach people, I say, if you don't do sales, you don't get sales. But even still, it's hard to kind of go to that asking. But it's a nice reframe that helps shift you out of that negative thing where if you don't ask, it can be perceived as arrogance, because I sort of perceive it as it's a negative thing to then ask. But actually, they might feel that if you don't ask me, then exactly like you don't want to work with me. And that can be seen as a negative thing. So it can somehow help to ask for it, because if you don't ask, they're going to expect you to ask. And if you don't ask, that's a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a common thing. I trained some people who work in a Harley Street clinic years ago, and they felt really weird about selling kind of equipment to people. So they're in a particular medical practice and you need equipment to do certain things, and they were not selling it to these people because they felt like they were being pushy or salesy or whatever. And I had to remind them that these people would appreciate being sold the stuff there and then, because if they have to go to Amazon or somewhere else to buy it, it's a massive inconvenience for them. And even if it is more expensive to buy it in the day, they don't necessarily care, because this is Harley Street. You have to reconnect with who you are and where you are and the quality of the care that you're doing. So I came up with this notion for them that to not offer them this equipment is you're not actually caring for them correctly. You're not doing your job properly. And once they reframed it and understood it in that way, it's, I get it now. So this isn't about pushing somebody to buy something they don't want, but it's making sure you're doing the best by them, which is really important.
So it seems like sales is definitely twofold. So one is getting the right mindset around it, and then secondly, understanding that there's the mechanics of selling and the things that you said, like you're selling a destination rather than the journey. The one thing I watched a class that you gave on selling, which is why I invited you on here, because I really liked your approach to it. And one thing that I thought was really good as well is you mentioned like the fact that we see sales as success or failure very immediately. So I've done a webinar, I've offered a product to people, they have or haven't bought, and then I would perceive the success of that based on whether they bought there and then. Whereas actually, so, sales can sometimes be a long game. And I understand in marketing, there's a journey people have to go through, and sometimes their nurture stage of that journey can take quite a long time. So how do you feel about the length of time for sales and how people get around that mindset and understanding, like, when to when to ask for the sale or when not to ask for the sale? Are there many rules around that?
I think that the main one really, and it's funny because there's concepts, there's principles I talk about, but there's never really any hard and fast rules. So, one of the classic ones is how many times you have to follow somebody up, etc. There's no magic number per se. But what I would say in terms of asking for the business and knowing whether to proceed with somebody or to step away, it comes down to specificity. Glad I pronounced that correctly. So if you're going to buy something from me right now, and if you're actually interested, you'll have questions about it. What size is this? How does this work? Does it come in this packaging? Blah, 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 etc. If you just say, oh, yeah, just send me some information, that's fine. I said, what would you like to know? Oh, I don't know. Just send me, I'll have a look. I haven't got time. I'm busy. If you're not being specific with me, then it's quite likely that you're not actually interested at all and you're trying to be polite and get rid of me. Because and viewers and listeners to this will understand that if you want to buy something, particularly if it's a significant purchase, you've got questions and you want to know specific things. So if your buyer isn't being specific with you, it's a bit of a red flag that maybe they're not interested. And that's okay, because one of the things I have with my clients and students is you're not going to sell to everybody you meet, and that is okay. That is not a failure at all. But we need to polarize these people as quickly as possible and as respectfully as possible. But there's no point wasting time dancing around our handbags talking to somebody who's patently not interested because we wish they were interested. So if we can understand straight away they're not being specific, we can ask them a few questions to really kind of move that forward, and then say, you know what, I'll step away from you for now and I'll just pursue another opportunity. So specificity is one of the big red flags for me in terms of, is somebody really interested or not?
Are there any other big red flags that people can look out for in terms of whether someone's interested or not?
Big red flags. I think, well, it's funny because the reverse happened to me recently. I was on a call with somebody and he asked me every single specific question under the sun, which was quite interesting. So okay, this is looking very good. The main red flag really is about specificity, but it's also about, are you dealing with the right person? How do you know that person can actually sign off this purchase? Now, depending on what you're doing, it's often hoped or kind of understood or assumed that we're dealing with the decision maker. But are you? So many sales are lost because you're talking with somebody and you might have a great conversation. They might even be specific, but they're not signing it off. Somebody else is. So one thing to bear in mind is to ask that question from the get-go, which is there anybody else involved in making this decision? Which is a much nicer way of saying, are you the decision maker? Because that's a bit like saying, yeah, are your mum and dad at home? Are you okay to do this? So is there anybody else involved in making this decision? Because we too easily assume that the person we're speaking to has the power, because of course they like to project the fact they do and pretend they do, perhaps if they don't. So we need to be clear on that, because a red flag is, all the questions, all everything, but then there's no follow-up from there because they've taken it to Bob in accounts or Linda or whoever's going to really sign this off, and they've just completely poo-pooed it and that's it. So do you actually know if this person can pull the trigger and buy from you?
Do you know what? I actually had many years ago when I bought my first house, this was in my early 30s, and I looked very young for my age, to be fair. But a double glazing salesman came to the door, and he asked if my mum and dad were home. And you know what? The sales conversation went no further from there because I was so insulted that
because they weren't at home.
They didn't check it was there, but like it was my home that I bought it. So yeah, he lost the sale straight away.
Definitely.
I've got a question at the moment that right now there's a lot of financial worries, a lot of financial uncertainty, and I'm hearing a lot from people that people are less willing at the moment to make purchases because they're worried about money. And obviously, I would imagine part of ethical sales is making sure that person can genuinely afford it and is comfortable with that purchase. You'd never want to push someone into something. But are there ways that maybe when you know that the product is right for someone, they need it, they're the right time for it, that's a good sale to make to somebody, and you may suspect that they've got worries about about things like that. Are there ways that people could reassure people? How would you handle that?
Well, there's a couple of things you can do. So when we had the pandemic, I released a piece of content called 24 Ways to Adapt to Selling in a Crisis, because this was a problem at that time. People, they had the money, but they were very nervous about spending money because we didn't know what was going to happen. In the very early days, it was quite scary. So one of the things you can do at a time like this, when things are perhaps a bit uncertain yet again and money is an issue, and one thing that not a lot of people actually do, is why don't you break your offering down into its component parts, if possible, and only sell part of the solution. So you can only do that successfully if it actually works independently. There's no point selling part of something to somebody if it's patently not going to work. But if you can break it down into bits, you can make it more affordable for somebody from the get-go, so you reach a lower price point to begin with. But also you almost then have this kind of pay-as-you-go methodology where you can buy this bit and then you can buy that bit as and when you need it, and then you can buy that bit, and it's a lot more palatable for people. So breaking things down into bits is a great piece of advice, and something that I don't see happen all too often. The second thing is to actually have some kind of financial arrangement in place. So is sort of siding up with a finance company or having some kind of payment plan, whether it's an official one or an unofficial one or whatever. Can you offer that? What would that look like? How would that work? Because we all, as much as people claim to not be able to afford things, most people sit in a house that they don't own because it has a mortgage or they have a credit card or whatever. So we all buy things we quote unquote can't afford. So it's never necessarily the issue that you don't have the money. It's actually about the perception of value quite often. So breaking it into bits, offering finance, and then the final thing is having some kind of guarantee or assurance. So most people have the money or the ability to get the money to buy the thing, but they're worried about, is it a waste of time? Is it a waste of money? Will it actually work, etc.? So what are you doing to minimize the risk for those people, and how can you do that? It might be cliche to have things like a money back guarantee, etc., but they're very useful in reassuring people that, and also things like social proof. So how many people have actually bought this? How many people approve of it? We look for 5-star reviews on Amazon, all this kind of stuff. Do you have that for your own offering? A lot of the clients and students that I speak with, as buyers, they'll say, oh my God, yeah, it needs to be a 5-star review, it needs to have at least 100 reviews, blah, blah, blah. But as a seller, they've got 6 reviews back from the 80s because they haven't really paid any attention to it, and they're behaving very differently as a buyer and as a seller. And I have to remind them that actually you need to think like your buyer and to understand they're going to judge you in this way, and you've got to be ready for that. So some kind of social proof, some kind of guarantee, some kind of finance arrangement, or more successfully, if possible, breaking it into bits. Can you sell just parts of your offering and almost have a pay-as-you-go approach to things?
That's a really good suggestion, actually. Another question. So we touched on this slightly earlier, but I do see this with people quite a lot. And so I noticed with myself when I used to give talks on stage, for example, and I do the kind of teaching bit, and then I kind of go on to now I'm going to do a sales pitch, and I would literally change personality. So I'd be very comfortable, very fluid, and I would go, and then my voice would go up. For me, like one of the things that helps me is I now have a script. And then I know all I do is follow the script, which has helped me. And obviously, I think from your reaction, like this sounds like a very common problem where people sort of chat and then the sales pitch. Have you got any tips for people about how they can make that easier?
Well, the main thing for me isn't to have the script, ironically, because scripts for me can be a little bit dangerous, because if you're sticking to a script, if you lose yourself in that and get lost. It's a bit like that very recent thing from Boris Johnson, right? Oh, forgive me, etc. As soon as you lose your place, it's really obvious that you've lost your place. Yes. For some people, if they're reading from a script or working from a script, it can sound a little bit mechanical. Okay, so now I'm very excited about this, and what we're going, and we don't get that kind of emotional connection. So I generally work for just bullet point lists. Just what are the rough things that we're trying to talk about? And then I'll ad-lib from there accordingly. And really, this comes back to what I mentioned earlier in the conversation, which is just that kind of recap thing. So most of you, if this was a stage thing, or most of you in the audience are suffering with this problem, blah, 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 and we'll paint that out and make it as disgusting and painful as possible for them, but they know how painful it is already. What you'd really like is this, to be successful, beautiful, happy, blah, 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 etc. How we'll get you from there to there is with a clear sales message, and this is what I suggest we would do. To do that, it costs in the region of about blah to blah £1,000. How does that sound to you? So just doing that recapping process, but only working from some high-level things. I'm really nervous about scripts because they're great in theory, but the second you kind of deviate from it, it's a problem. Or even if you don't deviate from it, we can kind of sense through something called emotional contagion. I can kind of feel your energy and you can feel mine. So even though you won't say, I know you're reading a script, you won't verbalize it, you will feel it, and you won't feel connected with me because it almost feels like I don't care about you. I'm literally just going through the motions by talking to you. I don't mean to be rude about you using a script when I'm saying this, by the way, but this is my experience. It's either we lose that emotional connection or the person just gets completely lost without their script, and it's a problem. And it also heightens that tension of, oh my God, if I don't stick to my script, what am I going to do? I have to be a different, it kind of plays in that narrative. I have to be a different person.
Yeah.
You just have to be you. But there's a couple of things which we need to talk about. Here's the deliverables. Here's what it costs. Here's how you buy it. They're the headings. We'll just ad-lib around that. There we go.
Okay, so I'm going to rip my scripts off henceforth.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't mean to be rude when I say that.
No, don't worry. No, always happy to learn. Talking about sort of mistakes, so we've talked about very much about people who are not comfortable with sales and probably approaching it quite clumsily, not doing it terribly well, because they actually feel uncomfortable because they want to have genuine connections with people. But on the other end of the spectrum, where you have people who are very comfortable with sales, but not necessarily doing it ethically. So what do you see as some of the real unethical sales tactics that are out there that maybe get people who shouldn't be buying to buy, that are very slick?
Yeah, well, they're not that slick. We can spot that. So I had one not so long ago where I was on a Zoom call, James, with a guy who, James, every 5 seconds, James, name-checked me, James. And saying somebody's name is nice, but if you over-egg the pudding, it's quite obvious and it feels quite disingenuous. It's kind of overuse of it's, you know, it's that you're going to have to buy me a new one kind of thing, you've worn my name out scenario. So over-naming somebody, I think, is an obvious one. Also producing kind of closed questions. So what would you like to do? Take option A or option B? So there's no choice for you to not buy from me. It's just which thing you're going to buy. So if I'm seeking to take the control away from you at any point in a selling scenario, in my kind of book, that's complete failure, because you've got to be able to choose for yourself and you've got to make the best decision for yourself. So over-naming people, removing their choice, and just being too kind of pressured and pushy. So at the end of this call, I'm going to ask you to make a decision and blah, blah, blah. And it's too much too soon. Things like, you know, let me go and ask my wife or ask my business partner, whatever, or what do you think they would say? Blah, blah, blah. And just trying to get that yes on the call, having that, why on earth do you need to know here and now immediately, yes, right now that I'm going to do this? What's the point of that? I don't see the point of that. That tells me that you need to hit your target rather than you're trying to help me.
Yes.
So that's the biggest red flag of all. And how many times have we been pressured into something like that? And either we've run a mile or we've had a moment of weakness where we've actually done it, but then we've unwound it afterwards. Or even if we haven't, we've just felt terrible about it. And that person and that product or service gets a bad reputation, because you shouldn't have to force people into buying stuff from you. I'm very wary of using terms like convince or persuade when I'm talking about selling. Because you shouldn't really have to do that for people. They should be coming to their own conclusions about whether or not they want to buy from you or not. If you're trying to convince or persuade somebody, it feels like coercion, right? I'm trying to make you see something that perhaps you don't want to see. It just doesn't work for me.
I'm glad you said that. I worked with someone once, and they said, you know, that they were helping me to sort of sell a product. And they said, you know, you have a call with someone, and they said, never get off the call without the credit card details. Because if they say yes on the call, they're going to go away and think about it. And to me, it's like, well, if they think about it afterwards, and it's a significant purchase for people, it's quite a large purchase. If they go away and think about it after it's not the right thing, then they shouldn't buy it. I would not want someone to buy and then go, oh, I wish I hadn't given her that money, but now I'm stuck with it. and I never once asked for anyone's credit card details. And this person was always going, well, you know, you're really bad. You're not good at you're not very good at that. But it just felt to me a very uncomfortable thing to do. I'm literally shoving someone in a corner and not letting them go until they give me their credit card details. So surely if the product's good enough and it's right for them, they should be keen to buy it. They should be chasing you up to buy it.
Yeah, well, they should definitely be making the right noises. So what you're touching on there is something I say with all my clients and students, which is I've got all these principles and concepts and things I talk about. None of them are really prescriptive, like you must do this or you mustn't do that. It's very kind of loose principles and things you can do. But it's all with the caveat that if you don't feel comfortable doing it, then you probably shouldn't do it. Because if you don't feel comfortable doing something, the other person will feel it and it will just get weird and it won't be productive ultimately. But in the traditional sales methodology is where you have to do these things. So you have to get their details, because if you don't do that, you failed coming off that call because they sold you on the reasons they didn't want to buy, blah, blah, blah. And it's all this heightened nonsense. If it doesn't feel right to you, you probably shouldn't do it. If you were buying this thing in that scenario, would you want to be pressured for your credit card details? No. Great. Don't do that to the people you're selling to then. And there's other things you can do. And the only reason we're applying that pressure is we're trying to get them to commit, which is fine, but there's other ways to do that. But you only want them to commit if they actually want the damn thing rather than they feel pushed to buy it from you.
Absolutely. Is there anything about sales that do think is really important that we haven't touched on in this chat? And there's probably you could say you could do a 5-hour seminar on sales. But I mean, top line, if someone is looking to improve and looking particularly to sell themselves, you know, like, and quite often in business, that is what we're selling. They might be buying this, but really what they're buying is trusting you. Is there any area that you think is, you know, like absolutely should be talked about that we haven't spoken?
Well, there's literally like 400 different things that I can talk about. It's quite difficult to kind of pin down to one or two. But one in particular that I see pretty much through all my clients and students. So we all have an understanding of our avatar. So the kind of business or person that we're looking for, the kind of characteristics they have, whether you're really prescriptive, you know, he's called Dave and he wears jeans and drinks red wine or whatever, or whether it's a rough approximation. Most people have that or think they should have that. But what we miss is what I call the trigger point. When do you need Dave or your ideal avatar? What's happening for that person or for that business? What actually moves somebody to act? I tempt fate always on podcast interviews and things like this, because I'm in my office, which is at the bottom of my garden at the moment. I always say, if there was a leak inside my house right now, one day there will be one, that's my trigger point to need a plumber.
Yes.
It's really basic, but just to get the point across. So I own taps and pipes and bars and toilets, things like that, but I don't need a plumber. As soon as it starts to leak, yes, I need a plumber. It's going to move me to act. It's going to trigger me to act. So in your own product or service or business, what's going to trigger somebody to act? What brings the urgency? What brings the motivation? Because you might need X type of person or business or whatever, but when do you need them? It could be a fixed date in the calendar, 31st of January for tax accountants. It could be an event that happens, a birth, a marriage, a death, whatever. It could be too much or too little of something. So I've got too much water in my house, I've had a leak, or whatever, not enough something else, so too much or too little of something. Or quite often it can be a feeling. If you feel a certain way. So a lot of my clients is lack of confidence. They don't feel confident selling. So they need me to help them with that. I sell them. So what they buy is a clear sales message, but what they're really buying is that confidence piece. So my own offering, that selling destination in the journey, nobody's actually buying a clear sales message really. What they're buying is that feeling of ownership and having an answer for everything. So in your own offering, think about what's the trigger point? What moves somebody to act? Look at the people that have bought from you already and try and understand that. If you're friendly with them, just ask them. And if you can understand that we want this type of person at this moment, then you're talking to the right people at the right time. And then if you take that to the next level, how can you find people who are experiencing that same trigger point together? Now, there's no association for people who are having emergency plumbing problems. So that's difficult. But there will be groups and associations and publications and events and all sorts of stuff for people experiencing different things. And adding those things together, that makes your marketing, your sales, your outreach that bit more effective because you're talking to the right people at the right time.
So we've got having the right mindset. We've got understanding some, let's say, technicalities of sales, like things you do and don't do, and then finding people who need exactly what you do right at this moment, and as many of them as possible. All of those things combined will definitely help someone get better at sales. Improve their sales.
Absolutely. And just giving yourself a break, right? Not being so hard on yourself. You won't close everybody you speak to. That's okay. I give you permission. It's fine.
Okay, so you're giving them permission not to close every sale.
It's absolutely fine.
To sort of wind up, what if someone's come to you and said, like, I am not successful at sales? And we've covered a lot of it in this podcast. Like, what's your kind of top line? Like, if you had, like, say a minute to give them a top line thing, this is going to have better at sales, what would your advice be to them?
Well, it'd be a couple of things we've already spoken about, right? So first of all, are you selling the destination, not the journey? Make sure you're focusing on what your buyers really want. Are you talking to the right people at the right time, which is very important? Are you actually behaving comfortably as you are, or are you trying to be somebody that you're not? And the final one, which we've kind of not touched on, which is important, is are you just chasing people up endlessly? So to go back to the thing before, the golden question I get often is, so how many follow-ups is it till somebody buys? And there is no magical number. But if you find yourself endlessly emailing people saying, did you get my message? Have you got any thoughts about this? Blah, blah, blah. We're just looking for different ways of saying, can I have your money here? Take the hint that somebody's not interested. And after, 2, 3, 4, 5 attempts, that's okay. I have this notion in my sort of coaching and sales consultancy of don't chase them, replace them. So take the energy and the kind of urgency you feel for me to chase you up and just send you an empty email saying, have you had any thoughts, James? I'll just try and find 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 more of you. If I put my energy into that, I've got more options. I feel better. My clients feel better because they're not being chased. It's better for everybody. Don't chase them, replace them.
It's a brilliant mantra to end on. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your time today. I've certainly learnt lots. I hope people listening have as well. If they wanted to find out more about you, where can they go?
2 places. So I'm really active on LinkedIn. So if you find me on LinkedIn, James Newell, Clear Sales Message, but also my website. So clearsalesmessage.com. There you'll find more about what I do in terms of the consultancy piece that I offer.
Great. Thank you very much, James.
Thanks indeed.